The autumn rain drummed against the windows of the Victorian mansion in Portland, Oregon, as I pulled into the circular driveway. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, not from the October chill, but from the familiar anxiety that always preceded dinner at the Whitmore estate. I sat in my beat-up Honda Civic for a moment, staring at the imposing structure before me. The house belonged to another era. All gabled roofs and wraparound porches, painted in deep burgundy with cream trim that seemed to glow under the amber porch lights. Through the tall windows, I could see the warm light of the dining room, shadows moving behind lace curtains. My wife Evangeline was already inside, having arrived earlier from her job at the non-profit downtown. She texted me that her mother was in one of her moods tonight, which could mean anything from passive-aggressive comments about my teaching salary to outright hostility disguised as maternal concern. I grabbed the bottle of Oregon Pinot Noir from the passenger seat, a wine I'd researched extensively, hoping to avoid the subtle grimace Cordelia Whitmore always wore when examining my contributions to her table. Everything had to be calculated when it came to my mother-in-law. The front door swung open before I could knock, revealing Cordelia in all her perfectly orchestrated elegance. At 62, she maintained the kind of beauty that spoke of expensive skincare, regular Pilates, and a lifetime of never having to worry about money. Her auburn hair was styled in loose waves, and she wore a silk blouse that probably cost more than I made in a week teaching high school English. "Dashiell, darling," she exclaimed, reaching up to kiss both my cheeks. Her perfume, something French and overwhelming, filled my nostrils. "You look tired. Are those teenagers running you ragged again?" The question was wrapped in maternal concern, but I caught the underlying message. "Your job is exhausting and beneath this family's standards." "Just the usual," I replied, forcing a smile as I handed her the wine. "Thank you for having me, Cordelia." She examined the bottle with the intensity of a wine critic, her manicured fingers tracing the label. "Willamette Valley 2019. How regional of you." She managed to make it sound like both a compliment and a criticism. "We'll save this for later." The foyer stretched before us like something from a period film, all hardwood floors and Persian rugs, with a crystal chandelier that cast prismatic light across oil paintings of long-dead relatives. The house felt like a museum where I was always the tourist, never the guest. "Everyone's in the study," Cordelia said, linking her arm through mine with practiced familiarity. Her grip was firm, possessive, guiding me deeper into the house. "Lysander is playing bartender again. You know how he enjoys his little performances." Lysander Whitmore was Cordelia's husband of 15 years, a man who'd married into the family name and never quite let anyone forget he belonged there. At 55, he maintained the kind of distinguished appearance that came from good genetics and better financial planning. Silver hair, sharp jawline, and piercing blue eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail of a conversation. The study hummed with conversation as we entered. Evangeline stood by the window, her blonde hair catching the lamplight as she spoke with her older brother Octavius. Even at 38, Octavius still had the bearing of the prep school athlete he'd once been, though his hairline was retreating and his waistline expanding despite his expensive gym membership. "Dash!" Evangeline's face brightened as she saw me, and the knot in my chest loosened slightly. She crossed the room with easy grace, her simple black dress elegant in its simplicity. I was starting to worry about the weather. The roads looked terrible when I drove over. "I just took my time," I said, accepting her embrace. She smelled like the lavender soap she always used, a scent that meant home and safety and everything this house wasn't. "Sorry I'm late. Had to finish grading essays. Still teaching those delinquents downtown." Octavius appeared beside us, his tone carrying the casual dismissal I'd grown accustomed to over the past 3 years. He worked in finance, something involving derivatives and risk management that he explained with the patience of someone addressing a particularly slow child. Before I could respond, Lysander approached with a tray of crystal tumblers filled with amber liquid that caught the light from the fireplace. "Gentlemen, ladies," he announced with theatrical flair, his voice carrying the slight accent he'd picked up during his years at Oxford. Sazerac cocktails all around, made with proper rye whiskey, of course. I accepted the glass gratefully, hoping the alcohol would steady my nerves. The crystal was heavy, etched with an intricate pattern that spoke of generations of wealth and tradition. "To family," Cordelia announced, raising her glass toward the ceiling as if toasting the spirits of her ancestors, "and to the bonds that tie us together for better or worse." The crystal chimed softly as our glasses met, a sound that seemed to echo in the high-ceiled room. The Sazerac was expertly crafted, the rye whiskey smooth and complex, with just a hint of absinthe on the finish. Lysander might have been many things, but he knew his way around a cocktail. As conversation resumed, I found myself observing the family dynamics I'd been trying to navigate for years. Cordelia commanded attention like a conductor leading an orchestra, her voice rising and falling as she directed the flow of discussion. Octavius sought her approval with the desperation of an adult child who'd never quite grown up. Evangeline moved between worlds, the one she'd been born into and the one she'd chosen with me, trying to keep everyone happy. And Lysander watched. His eyes tracked conversations, catalogued reactions, filed away information with the precision of someone who'd learned to survive in a world where he'd always be the outsider who'd married in. "Dashiell, darling." Cordelia's voice cut through my observations, sharp and focused. She'd moved closer, her grey eyes fixed on me with uncomfortable intensity. "You've barely touched your drink. Surely a man of your sophistication can appreciate good rye whiskey?" The pause before sophistication was barely perceptible, but it hit its mark. The room fell silent, all eyes turning toward me. I felt heat rise in my cheeks as I lifted the glass to my lips, the weight of expectation heavy in the air. That's when I noticed it, the way Lysander's jaw tensed almost imperceptibly, the slight tremor in his hand as he set down his empty glass. Something passed between him and Cordelia, a look that lasted less than a second, but felt loaded with meaning. "Of course," I said, raising the glass higher, "to excellent whiskey and gracious hosts." But as I brought the crystal to my lips, something made me stop. Call it instinct, call it paranoia, call it the teacher's intuition I'd developed after years of detecting when students were trying to pull something over on me. The liquid looked perfect, smelled perfect, but something in the air had shifted. Instead of drinking, I looked directly at Lysander and extended the glass toward him. "Actually," I said, my voice steady despite the racing of my heart, "why don't you have this one? You've been such a gracious host, mixing drinks for everyone else all evening." The silence that followed was deafening. The crystal tumbler remained suspended in the air between us, catching the firelight like a prism of tension. Lysander's blue eyes fixed on the glass, then flicked to mine with an expression I couldn't quite read. Surprise, perhaps? Or was it fear? "How thoughtful of you, Dash," he said, his Oxford accent more pronounced than usual. "But I've already had my share. Wouldn't want to appear ungracious by overindulging." The refusal came too quickly, too rehearsed. In 3 years of family dinners, I'd never seen Lysander turn down a drink. The man who collected vintage whiskies like trophies, who could discourse for hours about the subtle differences between Scottish and Irish distillation methods, was declining a perfectly crafted Sazerac. Cordelia's laugh cut through the silence like breaking glass. "Really, Dashiell, you're being dramatic. Lysander mixed those drinks specifically for our guests." Her grey eyes narrowed slightly. "Drink up, darling." There it was again, that phrase that had become her signature, delivered with a smile that never reached her eyes. But this time, something in her tone made my skin crawl. The endearment felt more like a command, and the way she emphasized "drink up" sent a chill down my spine. Evangeline moved closer, her brow furrowed with concern. "Dash, are you feeling all right? You look pale." And I studied the faces around me. My wife's genuine worry, Octavius's irritated confusion, Cordelia's forced patience, and Lysander's carefully neutral expression that couldn't quite hide the tension in his jaw. "I'm fine," I said, still holding the glass toward Lysander. "Just thought it would be nice to toast our host properly. After all, you put so much care into making these drinks." The Portland rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows, filling the uncomfortable silence. Somewhere in the house, a grandfather clock chimed 8 times, each note seeming to stretch longer than the last. Lysander cleared his throat, a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the hushed room. "You're very kind, but I insist you enjoy it yourself. I made it specifically for you." The phrase hung in the air like smoke. Specifically for you, not specifically for the group, not as part of the general hospitality. Specifically for me. "Lysander," Cordelia's voice carried a warning note, subtle but unmistakable. "Don't be silly. Our guests are waiting." But Lysander was looking at me now with something that might have been respect, or perhaps recognition. The kind of look that passes between two people who suddenly understand they're playing the same game. "Actually," he said slowly, reaching into his jacket pocket, "I think I will have that drink. But first, let me get my antacids. Rich food, you know. Age catching up with me." He pulled out a small silver pillbox, ornate and engraved with initials I couldn't make out from where I stood. His fingers fumbled slightly with the clasp, the first time I'd ever seen Lysander's perfect composure crack. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Cordelia snapped, her facade finally slipping. "You don't need those ridiculous pills, just drink the damn—" She caught herself, but not quickly enough. The room went dead silent except for the rain and the crackling of the fire. Evangeline's hand found my arm, her fingers gripping tightly. "Mother?" Evangeline's voice was small, uncertain. "What's going on?" Octavius, dense as always, chose that moment to break the tension with his typical obliviousness. "Christ, you're all being weird tonight. It's just a drink." He grabbed the glass from my hand before I could react, and downed half of it in one gulp. "Octavius, no!" Cordelia's scream pierced the air, raw and terrified, but it was too late. Octavius stood there for a moment, confused by his mother's reaction, the crystal tumbler still in his hand. Then his face went pale, and he looked down at the remaining liquid, as if seeing it for the first time. "What?" he began, but the word came out slurred. The glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor in an explosion of crystal and amber liquid. Lysander was already moving, his phone in his hand. "I'm calling 911. "No!" Cordelia lunged for the phone, but Lysander held it out of reach. "You can't! This isn't what was supposed to happen." The admission hit the room like a physical blow. Evangeline gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Octavius swayed on his feet, confusion and fear warring in his expression as he began to understand what his mother had just revealed. "What was supposed to happen, Cordelia?" I asked, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "What exactly was in that drink?" She looked at me with something approaching hatred, all pretense of maternal warmth abandoned. "You don't understand. You could never understand. This family, this legacy, it's bigger than any one person." "Mom, what did you do?" Evangeline's voice broke on the words. "What did you give him?" Octavius collapsed into the leather armchair behind him, his breathing becoming labored. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool October evening. I can't feel my hands properly." Lysander was already on the phone with emergency services, his voice crisp and professional as he provided the address and situation, but I noticed he was watching Cordelia carefully, as if expecting her to bolt. "It wasn't supposed to be him," Cordelia whispered, more to herself than to any of us. "It was never supposed to be him." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The specially made drink, the insistence that I drink it, the way Lysander had tried to refuse when I offered it to him, the careful choreography of the entire evening. "It was meant for me," I said quietly. "That drink was meant for me." Cordelia's silence was answer enough. Evangeline sank onto the sofa, her face white with shock. "Mother, how could you? He's my husband. How could you do this to him? To me? Because he's not one of us." Cordelia exploded, years of carefully controlled resentment finally spilling over. Because he's dragging this family down to his level, because every day he's in our lives, he makes us less than what we are. The words hung in the air like poison, more toxic than whatever had been in that glass. In the distance, I could hear sirens approaching, growing louder as they navigated the winding streets of Portland's West Hills. Octavius made a choking sound, his eyes wide with panic. Whatever Cordelia had put in that drink, it was working fast. "What did you give him?" Lysander demanded, grabbing his wife by the shoulders. "What was in that glass? The paramedics need to know." But Cordelia just smiled, the expression cold and terrible on her elegant features. "Ask your stepson when he wakes up, if he wakes up." The paramedics burst through the front door like a well-orchestrated emergency ballet, their heavy boots echoing against the marble foyer. Red and blue lights from the ambulance painted the Victorian mansion in alternating colors, casting eerie shadows through the lace curtains. "Patient is in here!" Lysander called out, his voice cutting through the chaos. He led the team of 3 paramedics into the study, where Octavius had slumped further into the leather armchair, his breathing shallow and his skin taking on a greyish pallor. What did he ingest? The lead paramedic, a woman in her 40s with short-cropped grey hair, knelt beside Octavius while her partners began setting up equipment. "We don't know exactly," I said, stepping forward. "It was in a cocktail, a Sazerac. He drank about half of it maybe 10 minutes ago." The paramedic's hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking Octavius's pulse and pupils while her partner prepared an IV. "Sir, can you hear me? Can you tell me your name?" Octavius, he managed, the words slurred but audible. "Can't feel my legs." Evangeline sat frozen on the sofa, tears streaming down her face as she watched her brother struggle. "Is he going to be okay? Please tell me he's going to be okay." We're doing everything we can," the paramedic replied, but her expression was grim. "I need to know what was in that drink. Any idea what substance we're dealing with?" All eyes turned to Cordelia, who stood pressed against the bookshelf like a cornered animal. Her perfect composure had cracked completely, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. "Cordelia," Lysander said, his voice deadly quiet, "tell them what you used." She shook her head frantically. "I can't. You don't understand what this means, what it will do to the family name." "The family name?" Evangeline's voice cracked with disbelief. "Your son is dying, and you're worried about the family name." One of the paramedics looked up from the IV he was inserting into Octavius's arm. "Ma'am, if you know what he ingested, you need to tell us now. Every second counts." The grandfather clock in the corner chimed the half-hour, its deep tones seeming to mock the urgency of the moment. Portland's autumn rain continued its relentless drumming against the windows, creating a soundtrack of natural indifference to the human drama unfolding inside. Lysander moved closer to his wife, and for a moment I thought he might physically force the information from her, but instead he spoke in a voice so low I had to strain to hear him. "Ricin," he said quietly. "She used ricin." The word hit the room like a physical blow. Evangeline gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The paramedics exchanged grim looks, the kind that suggested they'd just received very bad news. "How do you know?" I asked, though part of me already suspected the answer. Lysander's laugh was bitter, hollow, because I've been watching her for months, following her to that little laboratory she set up in the gardening shed, watching her extract it from the castor beans she grew last summer. Cordelia's face went white. "You knew?" "I've known for weeks that you were planning something. I just didn't know when or how." He turned to the paramedics. "Ricin poisoning, probably extracted from castor beans. How long does he have?" The lead paramedic's expression was professionally neutral, but I caught the slight shake of her head. "We need to get him to the hospital immediately. There's no antidote for ricin, but we can provide supportive care." As they prepared to move Octavius to the stretcher, he managed to grab my arm with surprising strength. His eyes, though unfocused, locked onto mine. Not supposed to be me," he whispered. "Was supposed to be you." The confirmation sent a chill down my spine. I squeezed his hand gently. Save your strength, Octavius. Focus on getting better. But we both knew the truth. Ricin was a death sentence, and the only reason I wasn't the one on that stretcher was blind luck and a teacher's paranoid instincts. As the paramedics wheeled Octavius out, Evangeline followed, her face streaked with tears. "I'm going with him," she said, not looking at her mother. "I won't leave him alone." That left me alone in the study with Cordelia and Lysander, the shattered crystals still glittering on the hardwood floor like fragments of a broken life. "Why?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. "Why did you want me dead?" Cordelia straightened, trying to reclaim some of her lost dignity. "Because you're poison," she said simply. "Everything you touch in this family turns to ash." Evangeline was going to be somebody, a curator, a patron of the arts, a worthy heir to the Whitmore legacy. Instead, she's wasting her life teaching children in some inner-city non-profit. "She's happy," I said quietly. "Happiness is a luxury we can't afford," Cordelia exploded. "Do you know what this family has built over 4 generations? The foundations we've endowed, the cultural institutions we've supported, and you want to reduce it all to happiness?" Lysander was pouring himself a drink from a different bottle. Scotch, I noticed, not the poisoned rye whiskey. His hands shook slightly as he lifted the glass to his lips. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked. "Since the day you married my daughter," Cordelia replied without hesitation. "I tried everything else first. I offered you money to leave. I tried to find dirt on you that would make Evangeline see reason. I even considered having you fired from your job, but nothing worked. You're like a tick, burrowing deeper and deeper into this family." The casual cruelty of her words was breathtaking. This woman had spent 3 years sharing meals with me, making small talk, pretending to accept me as part of the family, all while planning my murder. "And you?" I turned to Lysander. "How long have you known?" He finished his scotch before answering. "I started suspecting something when she began asking questions about untraceable poisons. Cordelia's always been intense about family matters, but this was different. When I found the castor plants in the greenhouse, I knew. Why didn't you stop her?" Lysander's smile was bitter, because part of me understood her reasoning. Not the murder part, I'm not a monster, but the part about you being a threat to the family's future. He set down his glass with a sharp click. "I've been the outsider who married in. I know what it's like to never quite belong. The difference is, I accepted it. I made myself indispensable. You made them love you instead." The sirens faded into the distance, carrying Octavius toward a hospital where doctors would try to save a life that had been sacrificed for mine. The silence they left behind felt heavy, pregnant with the weight of choices that couldn't be undone. "What happens now?" I asked. Before either of them could answer, we heard the sound of car doors slamming outside. Through the window, I could see the distinctive lights of police cruisers pulling into the circular driveway. Cordelia closed her eyes, her shoulders sagging in defeat. "Now we face the consequences of what I've done." Detective Sarah Chen stepped through the front door of the Whitmore mansion like she owned the place, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of the opulent foyer. Behind her, 2 uniformed officers flanked a younger detective who was already pulling out his notebook. The red and blue lights from their cruisers continued to paint the Victorian walls in alternating colors, giving the scene a surreal, almost theatrical quality. "I'm Detective Chen, Portland PD," she announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd seen too much human ugliness to be impressed by marble floors and crystal chandeliers. "We received a call about a possible poisoning." I stepped forward, my legs feeling unsteady. "That was me. I called when the paramedics were here. My brother-in-law, he drank something that was meant for me. He's on his way to the hospital now." Chen's dark eyes fixed on me with uncomfortable intensity. At maybe 45, she had the kind of weathered face that suggested she'd worked her way up through the ranks the hard way. Her black hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore a grey blazer over dark jeans. Professional, but ready for action. "And you are?" "Dashiell Morrison. This is my wife's family home." "Where is your wife?" She went with her brother to the hospital. He's dying. Chen's expression didn't change, but I saw her partner, a younger man with prematurely thinning hair, make a note. And who else was present when this alleged poisoning occurred? I gestured toward Cordelia and Lysander, who stood near the fireplace like defendants awaiting sentencing. Cordelia had somehow managed to restore some of her composure, her back straight and her chin raised in aristocratic defiance. Lysander simply looked exhausted, the weight of months of secrets finally taking their toll. Cordelia Whitmore, that's my mother-in-law, and Lysander Whitmore, her husband. Chen studied them both with the practiced eye of someone who could read guilt in a person's posture. Mrs. Whitmore, I understand you prepared the drinks this evening. I most certainly did not, Cordelia replied, her voice crisp with indignation. My husband mixed the cocktails. I was merely being a gracious hostess. The lie came so easily, so naturally, that for a moment I almost doubted my own memory. But Lysander stepped forward, his face pale but determined. That's not true, he said quietly. Cordelia, stop. It's over. The uniformed officers tensed slightly, hands drifting toward their weapons. Chen raised a hand, keeping them calm while her eyes remained fixed on Lysander. Mr. Whitmore, why don't you tell me what really happened here tonight? Lysander walked to the bar cart, his movements slow and deliberate. He picked up the bottle of rye whiskey, the same one Cordelia had used to make the fatal cocktails, and held it up to the light. My wife has been planning to murder Dashiell for months, he said, his Oxford accent making the words sound strangely formal. She extracted ricin from castor beans she grew in our greenhouse. Tonight, she added it to his drink specifically. Her son drank it by mistake. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the rain seemed to pause, as if nature itself was holding its breath. That's a very serious accusation, Mr. Whitmore, Chen said carefully. Do you have any evidence to support this claim? Lysander nodded toward the shattered crystal on the floor. The broken glass will test positive for ricin, but more importantly, she's been keeping detailed notes about her research. They're in a notebook hidden in her bedroom, behind the false back of her jewelry box. Cordelia's mask finally slipped completely. You bastard! She hissed, her elegant facade cracking like ice. 20 years of marriage, and this is how you repay me? 20 years of watching you poison everything you touch, Lysander shot back. 20 years of your manipulations and your cruelty disguised as family loyalty. I won't be complicit in murder. Chen gestured to one of the uniformed officers. Rodriguez, get a warrant started for the bedroom search. Thompson, call the crime scene team. I want that glass analyzed immediately. She turned back to Cordelia. Mrs. Whitmore, you have the right to remain silent. But Cordelia wasn't listening to the Miranda warning. She was staring at me with an expression of pure hatred, as if I'd somehow orchestrated this entire evening to destroy her. You don't understand what you've done, she said, her voice low and venomous. This family survived the Depression, 2 world wars, and economic collapse. We've maintained our position for over a century, and you insignificant little man with your insignificant little job, you think you can just waltz in here and tear it all down? I never wanted to tear anything down, I said quietly. I just wanted to love your daughter. Love? Cordelia laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. Love is what destroys families like ours. Love makes people weak, makes them settle for less than they deserve. I was trying to save Evangeline from a lifetime of mediocrity. Detective Chen finished the Miranda rights and nodded to the officers, who moved to arrest Cordelia. But as they approached, she pulled away, her eyes wild. You think this ends with me? She said, her voice rising to near hysteria. You think the rest of the family will just accept you now? They tolerate you because of Evangeline, but they'll never truly accept you. You'll always be the outsider, the one who doesn't belong. The words hit harder than they should have, because part of me knew they were true. Even with Cordelia gone, I would always be the scholarship kid who'd married into wealth, the teacher who'd somehow convinced a Whitmore to slum it in the real world. But as the officers led her away in handcuffs, I felt something unexpected. Pity. This woman had spent her entire life so focused on maintaining her family's status that she'd forgotten what family actually meant. She'd been willing to commit murder to preserve something that had already been lost. Lysander sank into the chair where Octavius had been sitting just an hour earlier, his head in his hands. "I should have stopped her sooner," he said quietly. "I should have known she'd actually go through with it." "Why didn't you?" I asked. He looked up at me, his blue eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. "Because I understood her reasoning. Not the method, never the method, but the fear behind it. This family, this legacy, it's all we know. The idea of losing it, of watching it slip away generation by generation." He shook his head. "I'm not excusing what she did, but I understand the desperation that drove her to it." Detective Chen finished giving instructions to the crime scene team and approached us. "Mr. Morrison, I'm going to need a full statement. And Mr. Whitmore, you'll need to come downtown for questioning as well, as a witness, not a suspect, based on what I've seen tonight." I nodded, feeling the weight of the evening settling over me like a heavy blanket. "What about Octavius? Will someone let us know?" "I'll have someone call the hospital for updates," Chen promised. "But I have to be honest with you, ricin poisoning is serious. The next few hours will be critical." As the detective prepared to take our statements, I found myself thinking about Evangeline, sitting in some sterile hospital waiting room while her brother fought for his life. I thought about the conversations we'd have to have, the family dynamics that would never be the same, the questions that would linger long after tonight was over. The grandfather clock chimed 11 times, marking the end of what had started as an ordinary family dinner. Outside, the Portland rain continued its endless rhythm, washing the city clean while leaving the stains on our souls untouched. The fluorescent lights of Providence Portland Medical Center buzzed overhead like angry insects, casting everything in harsh, unforgiving white. I found Evangeline in the surgical waiting room on the 3rd floor, curled in an uncomfortable plastic chair that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd never actually sat in one. Her blonde hair had escaped its careful styling, falling in limp strands around a face that looked years older than it had just hours ago. "Dash," she whispered as I approached, and the relief in her voice was palpable. She stood and fell into my arms, her body shaking with exhaustion and fear. "I was so scared you weren't coming. The police—" "It's okay," I murmured into her hair, breathing in the familiar scent of her lavender soap beneath the antiseptic smell of the hospital. "I'm here. I gave my statement. Everything's going to be okay." But even as I said the words, I knew they weren't true. Nothing would ever be okay again. Not really. The family she'd grown up believing in, the mother she'd loved despite her flaws, all of it had been revealed as hollow, poisonous. We sat together in the uncomfortable chairs, her head on my shoulder, watching the digital clock above the nurse's station tick away the minutes. 11:47 p.m. It felt like a lifetime since I'd pulled into the circular driveway of the Whitmore mansion, nervous about nothing more serious than choosing the right wine. "Tell me what happened," she said quietly. "After I left, tell me everything." So I did. I told her about the police arriving, about Lysander's confession, about the evidence they'd found in Cordelia's bedroom. I watched her face as I spoke, seeing her struggle to reconcile the mother she'd known with the woman who'd planned my murder, with the methodical precision of a research project. "Ricin," she said finally, the word coming out like a curse. "She grew those castor plants right in front of us. I helped her water them last spring. I thought she was just exploring new gardening techniques." The automatic doors at the end of the hall whooshed open, and Dr. Patel emerged from the surgical suite. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 40s, with dark skin and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His scrubs were rumpled, and he moved with the careful exhaustion of someone who'd been fighting a losing battle. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, approaching us with the measured gait healthcare professionals used when delivering bad news. Evangeline stood quickly, her hand finding mine. "How is he? How's Octavius?" Dr. Patel's expression was professionally compassionate, but grim. "I won't lie to you, it's not good. Ricin is an extremely potent toxin, and by the time it reaches the bloodstream, there's very little we can do to counteract it. We're providing supportive care, IV fluids, oxygen, medications to support his blood pressure and heart function, but there's no antidote. What does that mean? Evangeline's voice was barely a whisper. It means we're doing everything medically possible to give his body the best chance to fight this, but I have to prepare you for the possibility that— He paused, choosing his words carefully. The next 24 hours will be critical. If he's going to survive this, we'll know by tomorrow night. The words hit Evangeline like physical blows. She swayed slightly, and I tightened my grip on her hand to steady her. Can we see him? He's sedated and on a ventilator, but yes. ICU visiting hours are restricted, but given the circumstances, I can make an exception. Room 314, down the hall. We walked through the corridor in silence, past rooms where other families were fighting their own battles against illness and injury. The ICU was quieter than the rest of the hospital, filled with the soft beeping of monitors and the whispered conversations of nurses. Octavius looked nothing like the arrogant, self-important man who'd dismissed my career just hours earlier. Tubes and wires connected him to an array of machines that beeped and hummed with mechanical precision. His face was pale and slack, his usually perfect hair mussed against the white pillowcase. Evangeline approached the bed cautiously, as if afraid she might wake him. "Octavius, it's me, it's Evie." The childhood nickname hung in the air, a remnant of simpler times when sibling rivalry was the worst problem they faced. She reached out and took his hand, careful not to disturb the IV line taped to his wrist. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "This should never have happened. None of this should have happened." I stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder, watching my brother-in-law fight for his life because of a drink that was meant for me. The guilt was overwhelming, not because I'd done anything wrong, but because the simple accident of his impulsiveness had saved my life and destroyed his. "He always was impatient," Evangeline said, managing a watery smile. "Even as kids, he could never wait for anything. Remember when he ate my birthday cake before the party? He was 8 years old and couldn't wait another hour." The memory seemed to pain her more than comfort her, a reminder of the innocent boy who'd grown into a flawed but loving man, a man who was dying because he'd grabbed the wrong glass at the wrong moment. A soft knock at the door interrupted our vigil. A nurse entered, a kind-faced woman in her 50s with graying hair and gentle eyes. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said quietly, "but there are some people here to see you. Family members?" Evangeline and I exchanged glances. "Who? A Mr. and Mrs. Ashford?" They said they're relatives. Evangeline's face brightened slightly. "Uncle Richard and Aunt Margaret. Octavius must have called them before." She gestured helplessly toward the bed. We made our way back to the waiting room to find a distinguished older couple sitting near the windows. Richard Ashford was Cordelia's younger brother, a retired federal judge who'd always been the more reasonable member of the family. His wife, Margaret, taught literature at Reed College, one of the few family members who'd ever shown genuine interest in my work as a teacher. "Evangeline, dear," Margaret rose and embraced her niece, her own eyes red with tears. "We came as soon as we heard. How is he?" "Not good," Evangeline managed. "The doctors, they don't know if he's going to make it." Richard's face was carved from stone, his judicial composure intact despite the circumstances. "And Cordelia? We heard she was arrested?" I nodded. "She's being charged with attempted murder. The drink was meant for me, but Octavius drank it by mistake." Richard closed his eyes, looking older than his 70 years. "Jesus Christ! I knew she was struggling with Evangeline's marriage, but this—" He shook his head. "I'm sorry, Dashiell. I'm sorry you had to endure this, and I'm sorry my family put you in danger." The apology meant more than he probably realized. For 3 years, I'd felt like an intruder in the Whitmore family circle. To have Richard, a man I respected, acknowledge that I'd been wronged rather than suggesting I'd somehow brought this on myself was a small but significant comfort. "What happens now?" Margaret asked. "With Cordelia, I mean, and with poor Lysander." I don't know, I admitted. The police said there would be more questions, probably a trial if she doesn't plead guilty. Lysander, I think he's going to cooperate with the prosecution. We sat together in the uncomfortable chairs, 4 people bound by tragedy and blood, waiting for news that might never come. Outside the hospital windows, Portland slept on, unaware that one family's careful facade had crumbled in the space of a single evening. The digital clock ticked toward midnight, marking the transition from what had started as an ordinary Saturday night to a Sunday that would change everything. In room 314, machines breathed for Octavius Whitmore, while his body fought a battle that medical science could only observe, not influence. And in the waiting room, his sister held my hand and wondered how many other secrets her family had been keeping, how many other lies had been dressed up as love and tradition. Dawn crept through the hospital windows like a reluctant witness, painting the waiting room in soft greys and muted gold. I dozed fitfully in the plastic chair, my neck stiff and my back aching, while Evangeline curled against my shoulder in the kind of exhausted sleep that comes after emotional devastation. The shift change had brought new nurses, fresh faces to replace the tired ones who'd shepherded us through the long night. Dr. Patel appeared in the doorway at 6:23 a.m., his scrubs replaced, but his expression unchanged, professionally compassionate, carefully neutral. Evangeline stirred as he approached, immediately alert despite her exhaustion. "Doctor, how is he?" "He made it through the night," Dr. Patel said, and I felt some of the tension leave her body. "That's significant with ricin poisoning. His vital signs have stabilized, and his kidney function, while compromised, hasn't failed completely." Does that mean—" She couldn't finish the question. "It means he has a fighting chance. The next few days will tell us more, but this is the best news I could give you at this point." Richard Ashford had been dozing in a chair across from us, but he opened his eyes at the sound of voices. Margaret sat beside him, her grey hair mussed, but her attention focused on the doctor. "Can we see him?" Evangeline asked. "He's still sedated, but yes, just for a few minutes." "No." We made our way back to room 314, where Octavius looked marginally better than he had the night before. Some colour had returned to his face, and the monitors showed steadier rhythms. Evangeline took his hand again, squeezing gently. "You stubborn bastard," she whispered, managing a smile through her tears. "You always did have to prove you were tougher than everyone else." As if in response, Octavius's fingers twitched slightly in her grasp. It might have been involuntary, but Evangeline gasped with hope. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Detective Chen, need to speak with you this morning. Can you come to the station around 10 a.m.? I showed Evangeline the message. "You should go," she said immediately. "Get this finished. I'll stay with Octavius." "Are you sure? Uncle Richard and Aunt Margaret are here. I won't be alone." She kissed my cheek, a brief touch that felt like forgiveness and gratitude combined. "Thank you for staying all night." The Portland Police Bureau's central precinct was a utilitarian building that looked like it had been designed by committee, all concrete and glass, with no thought for aesthetics. Detective Chen met me in the lobby, looking more rested than she had any right to after the previous evening. "Mr. Morrison, thank you for coming in. How's your brother-in-law?" "Alive. The doctors think he might make it." "That's good news." She led me through a maze of cubicles to a small conference room with grey walls and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. "I wanted to update you on the investigation." She opened a file folder and spread several photographs across the table. Crime scene photos of the shattered glass, close-ups of the notebook they'd found in Cordelia's bedroom, and what looked like laboratory equipment from the gardening shed. "Your mother-in-law kept meticulous records," Chen said, pointing to photocopied pages covered in Cordelia's precise handwriting. "She documented every step of the ricin extraction process, tested different concentrations, even practiced the timing of when to add it to drinks." The clinical nature of the planning was chilling. These weren't the desperate scribblings of someone who'd snapped in a moment of rage. They were the careful notes of someone conducting research. "She's been planning this for months," I said, though it wasn't really a question. At least 6, based on the dates in her notebook. The first entry is from April, right after your wife turned down a position at the Portland Art Museum to continue working at the community center. I remembered that conversation. Evangeline had been offered a curatorial position that would have nearly doubled her salary and put her in the kind of social circles her mother approved of. She turned it down because she loved working with underserved communities, helping kids who reminded her of the students I taught. There's something else, Chen continued, flipping to another page. She didn't plan to stop with you. The words hit me like cold water. What do you mean? According to her notes, you were just the first step. She was also researching ways to influence your wife's career choices, make her more amenable to the family's expectations. The implications were staggering. Cordelia hadn't just wanted me dead. She'd wanted to reshape Evangeline's entire life, turn her into the dutiful daughter who would carry on the family legacy without the inconvenience of her own desires. Jesus, I whispered. Mr. Whitmore, Lysander, has been very cooperative. His testimony combined with the physical evidence makes this a strong case. The DA is considering offering your mother-in-law a plea deal, life without parole, instead of the death penalty. I thought about Cordelia sitting in a jail cell somewhere, probably still convinced that she'd been acting in her family's best interests. What about Lysander? Is he facing charges? Conspiracy after the fact, possibly. But given his cooperation and the fact that he ultimately prevented the crime from succeeding, Chen shrugged. The DA's office will make that decision. He'll probably face some consequences, but nothing like what his wife is looking at. We finished the interview an hour later, with Chen promising to keep me updated on the case's progress. As I walked back to my car, Portland was coming alive around me. Coffee shops opening, commuters heading to work, the city moving forward, as if the world hadn't fundamentally shifted for my family the night before. My phone rang as I reached the Honda. Evangeline's voice was bright with exhaustion and relief. Dash, he's awake. Octavius is awake. I drove back to the hospital faster than I probably should have, finding the ICU buzzing with activity. Evangeline met me at the nurse's station, her face transformed by hope. The doctor says he's responding well. He's still weak, and they're not sure about long-term effects, but he's conscious and talking. We entered room 314 to find Octavius propped up slightly, the ventilator tube removed, though oxygen continued to flow through a nasal cannula. His voice was hoarse when he spoke, barely above a whisper. "Dash," he said as I approached the bed, I need to apologize. You don't need to apologize for anything. Yes, I do." He paused, gathering strength. "I've been an ass to you for 3 years. Treated you like you weren't good enough for our family, like you were some kind of charity case Evangeline picked up." Evangeline started to protest, but Octavius held up a weak hand. "Let me finish. When I drank that glass, when I realized it was meant for you," his eyes filled with tears, I understood that you're more family than I ever was. You would have died for any of us without question, and I couldn't even be bothered to learn your students' names when you talked about your work." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with the weight of near-death honesty. Outside the window, Portland's Sunday morning continued its peaceful pace, unaware that forgiveness was being born in room 314. "We're family," I said simply. "All of us. The good, the bad, and the complicated." Octavius managed a weak smile. "Even after what Mother did?" I looked at Evangeline, then back at him. "Especially after what your mother did. She tried to destroy our family to preserve some idea of what she thought it should be. But real families survive things like this. They get stronger." 3 months later, I would stand in a courthouse and watch Cordelia Whitmore accept a plea agreement for attempted murder. Lysander would receive probation and community service for his role in concealing her plans. The Whitmore fortune would be quietly distributed among various family members, with Evangeline and Octavius choosing to donate their mother's portion to organizations supporting domestic violence survivors. But that Sunday morning in the hospital, none of that mattered. What mattered was that we were alive, we were together, and we were finally truly honest with each other. Sometimes the most dangerous poison isn't in a glass. It's in the lies families tell themselves about love, loyalty, and what really matters. The antidote isn't found in any medicine cabinet. It's found in the choice to see each other clearly, accept each other fully, and build something better from the wreckage of what came before. As Octavius drifted back to sleep, Evangeline and I sat in the uncomfortable hospital chairs and planned our future, not as representatives of some grand family legacy, but as two people who'd chosen each other and would keep choosing each other, no matter what anyone else thought we deserved. Outside, Portland hummed with life, and somewhere in the distance church bells chimed the hour, marking not an ending, but a beginning.